years, done marriage retreats. I'll be in West Virginia, in fact, next month up in Charleston doing one. And sometimes these lessons are a little bit different than maybe you have in a gospel meeting, but let me tell you, there is nothing more relevant today than talking about the home and the significance of the home and our roles in the home. I don't think I have to say anything today about how the home is at attack. You know that. And you know how that there's just everywhere we look, people are trying to demean and put down the home as God intended. So there's nothing, I mean absolutely nothing more important than these lessons we're going to have tonight and the lessons that we'll have tomorrow. When a man loves a woman. I can remember in the late 60s and the early 70s as a teenager riding up and down the highways in my 1965 Ford Fairlane with my 8-track tape player, listening to Percy Sledge sing, "When a Man Loves a Woman." I want to begin by sharing something with you that I think is significant, and I'll even refer to it. Don't worry, men. We'll talk to the ladies tomorrow at 2 o'clock as we talk about stand by your man. And I'm going to use this same introduction basically for both of them because it's significant. You might be wondering, well, why can't you just deal with both in one lesson? And the reason that you really can't is because a man's a man and a woman's a woman. One's from Venus and one's from Mars. And they're so different. And a lot of times, that's where we make our mistake as husbands and as wives. We think that we all are basically the same, and especially we have the same needs for each other. And that is so incorrect. Dr. Willard Harley wrote a book many years ago. It's a book that's been around, like I said, for a long time. You can find it in most bookstores. It's been revised. It's a book that I recommend every person that I marry read. I insist when I do premarital counseling that they read this book. Dr. Harley was a marriage psychologist for many years. And through 25 years of marriage counseling, he took like 15,000 records and he went through them. And he began to look what he said were the basic needs of a man in marriage and the basic needs of a wife in marriage. And once he come to the conclusion what are the 5 basic needs of a wife and what are the 5 basic needs of a man, he wrote this book. And he dedicates a chapter to each of these needs. Now, I want to share these needs with you because I think it's significant. Because in fact, in the things we're going to talk about tonight and tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we'll see how all this plays out with these basic needs. I'll begin with women. His conclusion was that the 5th basic need of a woman in marriage is family commitment. The 4th basic need of a woman in marriage is financial security. The 3rd basic need is honesty and openness. And the 2nd biggest need that she has in marriage is conversation. She just wants to have somebody in her life that'll talk with her. And the number 1 need of a woman in marriage, believe it or not, guys, is affection. Affection. And then he summed up the men. And he says these are the 5 basic needs of a man in marriage. Number 5 is admiration. We'll talk a little about that tomorrow. Number 4, domestic support. Number 3, an attractive spouse. Number 2, and this one it always confused me, and I don't know where he got this one, but he says the 2nd biggest need that a man has is recreational companionship from his mate. Now, the number 1 need of a man in marriage, yeah, some smiles on your face. You guys have got it figured out, don't you? Sexual fulfillment. Now, watch this. Did you notice the needs of a woman in marriage? And as you compare them to the needs of a man in marriage, did any of them overlap? No. There is not one similarity between the list of the needs of a man in marriage and the needs of a woman in marriage. And here's where we make our mistakes so often. You see, I'm a man, and I look at that list and I say, oh, that guy is on his game. Yes, sir, he has studied and he knows what he's talking about. So I look at that list and I know my needs. Women, they look at the list and say, that must be the most tender man in all the world. Affection. How did he know that affection is our number one need? What a man. Now, a woman understands that. She looks at that and she says, these are my needs. Here's our problem. See, a woman, she wants to be a good wife, and therefore, she sees her needs, she knows her needs, and so many times she thinks that his needs are the very same needs that she has. And so being a good wife, she wants to go about fulfilling his needs, thinking that all the time her needs are the same needs he has. And so what happens is his needs never get met. And the same thing happens with a husband. He wants to be a good husband. He wants to do the best he can. And so he says, yes, sir, I understand my needs. And so he thinks her needs are the same needs he has. And so he begins to try to meet her needs with his needs. And so she begins to live a life that's unfulfilled. And her needs are not met. And the reason is because we don't understand the difference. And I really believe this is why this book is so crucial and why I insist that these couples read this book. It is because it helps a woman as much as she can to understand a man. And it helps a man as much as he can to understand a woman. Now, with that in mind, let's get into our lesson tonight. With that in mind, of these basic needs of a man and a woman and how different they are, let's look at them. These two lessons are going to be entirely different. But one thing about them is they're going to be based upon the study of God's Word. Now, men, do you know what your wife really needs? Do you know what she needs more than anything else? She needs a real man. Now, here's the question. Where do you go to get an example of a real man? Do you go to Hulk Hogan and say, now there's an example of a real man? Do you go to, one of these sports figures that makes millions of money? You go to Tom Brady and say, there's a guy who can throw a flat football. That's a real man. Or do you go to some movie star like, Brad Pitt or Tom Cruise or whatever and say, where do we go? Well, I want to go to someone tonight that I think can help us, guys, to understand what it's really like when a man loves a woman. His name is Rocky. He was married, had a mother-in-law. And any guy that's got a name like Rocky has to be a real man. And he wrote by inspiration, talking about Peter. He wrote by inspiration, and he gave us men some characteristics that ought to be in our life when we really love a woman. Now, I appreciate Rocky, that brawny fisherman. I appreciate him for several reasons, for opening up and especially giving us 1 Peter chapter 3 and in verse 7. And it's amazing what he did. It amazes me how he sort of simplifies it for us men. Now, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we're going to go to several scriptures as we talk about, how you stand by your man. But Peter, understanding how men are, he's not going to go all over the page trying to explain to men. He's going to make it simple so we men can understand it. And it's amazing how he puts it into one verse. A verse that you can take and put in your car so you can see every day what it ought to be like when a man loves a woman. A verse that you can put on the mirror where you shave so you can see it every day so you can see what it's like when a man loves a woman. In fact, it's a one verse, guys, just one verse that you could put in your little brain box, and you can remember what it's really like when a man loves a woman. We're just going to take that one verse, guys, and we're going to just break it down. Here's what Peter said to us. He said, husbands, likewise, dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Let's break it down. Oh, he does such a marvelous job. He does it in such a way that it just holds you. He does it in such a way that you just can't forget it. Here's the first thing that Rocky says. He says, fellas, listen. You know what really happens when a man loves a woman? He gives her permanence. Permanence. Notice he begins, husbands likewise dwell with them. Gentlemen, it may be in life that your wives can and should question you about certain things. And it might be sometimes in life that your children might question you about certain things. But there's one thing that your wife and your children should never question. And that is if you're going to be there for the long haul. Do you remember we read a few moments ago from Dr. Harley's book that the fifth basic need of a woman in marriage is family commitment. There's something special about a woman when she knows that her man is committed to her and that her man is going to be there for the long haul. I tell my sweet wife, I say, honey, I love you. I tell her that all the time. And I tell her, I say, honey, I'm not going anywhere. You stuck with me. You might ought to pray for her. I said, you stuck with me, honey. I said, listen, if anybody leaves, you leave. And by the way, if you leave, I'm going with you. Women need to hear that in their life. I read about a man who, and this is what he did. He had it like when you came into the house and going up the stairs, there was this big plaque that he had made. And the plaque said, I am here for the long haul. You can count on me. And there's one thing your wife needs to know is that you're committed to this marriage. She needs to know that when you took that vow for better, for worse, for rich or poor, until death do you part, that you meant it. And that there's no thought in your mind and your heart that you're ever going to walk out. She needs someone to, as Peter says, to dwell with her. It was several years ago, and it was one of those late night shows. And they had one of those Hollywood actors that came out, and he was involved in romantic roles. And so it came along during the interview that the person said to him, he says, tell me, you're involved in all these romantic roles. What is a great lover? So you're expecting, the kind of Hollywood answer. And his answer blew everybody away. He said, a great lover is a man who can be satisfied by one woman for life. A great lover is a man who can satisfy one woman for life. A great lover is not someone who goes from woman to woman to woman, because any dog can do that. And how true that is. I believe that he hit the nail on the head. Today, we have too many fathers that are walking out. Today, do you realize of the single parents that we have, that 9 out of every 10 single parents are moms? Because dads are not dwelling, as Peter said. Dads are leaving the homes like never, ever before. I don't know why. I don't understand it. But gentlemen, you need to understand that this is written by inspiration. And there is a purpose and a reason. God understood the needs of a woman. He understood, and so he inspires Peter. He says, Peter, listen, when you love a woman, you dwell with her. Why? Because he understands that children, so often when the dad walks out, yes, mom can do a wonderful job, but there's just some things a mom can't give. And children are affected. I mean, that's just the way it is. You can go, I'm not going to give you a bunch of statistics, but you can go and you can search on the internet and you will see it over and over and over again, how children are affected when dads walk out of the house. Now, I'm sure you're like the church at Hartselle, that you've got some single parents here that are doing a great job. They're beating the odds. I mean, they're bringing their children and they're doing a wonderful, wonderful job. God bless you with that. But you see, out there in the world, that's not happening. Out there in the world today, we've got dads and husbands that know nothing about commitment. Now, you look at this, you say, whew, I passed the first one. All right, this might be easier than I thought tonight. I mean, preacher, I want you to know I'm still with the same woman. And besides that, preacher, we still live in the same house. And guess what? We still use the same bathroom. And we sleep in the same bed, preacher. We eat together at the same table. Man, whew, I have passed number one. Well, maybe, and maybe not. Because you see, when you began to look at this word that Peter uses here, when he says, dwell with them, that is a beautiful word, and it is a deep word. And what it means is, it means a deep down togetherness. It means more than just sharing a house together. It means sharing a life together. You see, guys, we got to be careful about this. What does a woman need? What was one of her basic needs? Conversation and affection. She needs somebody to be open and honest and someone to talk to her. We say, I'm at home, and we may be home physically, but we're not home in spirit. I mean, we may be at home, but we spend most of our time in our bass boats or on the golf course or wherever, but we're there at night. And then when we are there at night, we find ourselves, you know, in front of the TV doing this and that, or we find ourselves in front of the internet, and we're in the same room, but we're not sharing a life together. And you may be gone a lot, even though you're staying in the same house, and you've been married for several years, and you may even quote me some scripture. You may say, preacher, you know, the Bible says in 1 Timothy 5:8 that if a man doesn't take care of his household, that he's worse than an infidel. I work. The problem is you maybe don't have to work as much as you do. And I got to do that, and so you quote me some scripture along the way. I won't forget it. It was just several years ago. He came into my office, and he sat down, and he says, you're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you. I said, what? And he started crying, and he said, my wife's left me. And he said, can you believe that? He said, can you believe that? He says, Philip, you know the car that I provide for that woman. He says, you know the house that she lives in. And you know the kind of clothes that I put on that woman. And I can't understand this. I mean, look at the clothes she wears, the house she lives in, and all of this. And she's gone. She's got her another fellow. How in the world could a woman walk away from that? Now, I have the tough job of telling him the true picture. I have a tough job of telling him that that bass boat, that $40,000 bass boat that he spends most of the time in and all these tournaments and everything, and all these other places he goes and all these other extra hours he works are the cause of it. I have the responsibility to say to him now, look, don't you understand? Don't you understand that when she married you, she didn't marry that dress. She didn't marry that car. She didn't marry for that house. When you got married, you didn't have any of those things. The reason she married you is because of you. And the problem is that you're not dwelling down deep You're not sharing a life. You're sharing a house together, but you're not sharing a life. Gentlemen, tonight all across this country, there are many women who are sitting in the same house with their husband, but they go unnoticed, they go without attention, and they go without appreciation. And the reason is because we've got our eyes glued to the TV, we've got our nose in the paper, or we've got our face in the internet. And what she needs more than anything else is when she comes in is for us to cut the blooming TV off, get off of that internet, and put the paper down and share our life with her. It is amazing. It is amazing how we can live in the same house together and never share a life. And by the way, let me just throw this in. Do you know the number one reason, guys, why wives become unfaithful in marriage? Do you know why? It is this very reason. Because she has a husband that will not share a life, that will not dwell with her. Now you guys are saying, wait a minute, wait. This doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that. You know the reason you don't understand it? It's because you're a man and she's a woman. You see, all this stuff I'm going to say from here on out tonight, and what I'm going to say at 2 o'clock is not going to make any sense to you women tomorrow. You're going to say you're crazy. And the reason is because you're not a man. And the reason you're not going to understand a lot of these things is because you are a man and you're not a woman. And you don't understand the basic needs it has. Peter says, listen, you know when a man loves a woman, what happens? He lets her know that she is the most important thing in his life, and he lets her know that he is there for the long haul. He will dwell with her. Boy, that's pretty good, Rocky. Can you give us another characteristics of what it's like when a man loves a woman? He says, I got another one. What is it? He says perception. Perception. Notice as we read on. Husbands likewise dwell with them, watch it, with understanding. Whoa. Now what that means is, it means with knowledge. It means with perception. And he's saying here, when you study that word, he's saying, fellas, listen, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to your wife to take the time to find out what makes her tick. To take the time to find out what it is that makes her angry, what it is in life that makes her happy, and what her dreams are, and what her goals are in life. I don't know what you have to do, but just do what you got to do. I don't know if you need to take a course in womanology or what it is. But gentlemen, because we are the way we are, I mean, we're just goal-oriented people, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. And because we get our little laser beam focused, it's hard for us. I mean, you know what we do? Instead of taking the time to try to understand the woman with whom we live, and to try to understand her likes and dislikes, we just pass it off because we don't want to take the effort. We don't want to read the books. We don't want to go to the marriage retreats. We don't want to do whatever it has. We don't want to take the time to try to understand her. So here's what we do. When she does these things that we don't understand, we say, she's just a woman. And we go on our happy way, and we're happy. We've figured it all out, right? She's just a woman. And we pass it off. That's not fair to her, and it is not fair to you. You see, this thing of being married is a serious thing, and it doesn't happen. A good marriage and a good relationship does not happen by accident. It takes a lot of working, and gentlemen, it takes work in trying to understand her needs and who she is. Your wife is an entirely different creature than you. She's different biologically. I guess you've probably figured that out by now. Her genes and chromosomes are different. She matures quicker. Her metabolism is slower. She's different biologically. She's different emotionally from you. It's amazing. We men, I mentioned a while ago, we're goal-oriented. And we men, we always want the product. We want the end results. That's what the product. That's what we're concerned about. You see, our wives, because of the way that God made them, they like the process. The process is just so important, and they want to get into the process. Now, let me give an example of this. I come home sometimes and I say, honey, did you know that so-and-so had a baby? She says, oh, no. She says, is it a boy or a girl? And I say, I don't know. She says, how much did it weigh? And I say, I don't know. She says, what are they going to name it? I don't know. She says, how long was it? I say, I don't know. You see, she's concerned with the process. The process is important. That's just the way God made her. All we men are concerned about is the end result. Now, fellas, let me tell you, I have learned this the hard way. I'm going to help you out here. I came in one day, and I run my mouth all the time, and I'm preaching and all that, and my wife's retired. She was a school teacher for 28 years, and so, and she's such a wonderful lady, and I'm blessed to have her in my life. But what happens is because she taught school and she was around children and so forth, I mean, she could just talk herself out during the day. So it was great. And I came home, I'd talk myself out in the day. She'd talk herself out, so it was good. And there was one day I came in and I just worried with some problems, and I'd been preaching somewhere, whatever. And she started in, I got in that day, and she hadn't talked to anybody, and she started in with the process. And so this is a no-no, guys. I finally said to her, I said, honey, because she wouldn't get to the product. I said, honey, would you just give me the short version? Have you ever slept on the couch? Yeah. They're different. They're different. You owe yourself and your relationship to understand the differences. She is differently behaviorally. Have you ever seen some of this study that's been going on about right brain, left brain? It's been going on for a while. I saw it years ago. I read about it, first of all, years ago. And this is what they've discovered. That when men think, they think with both sides of the brain. And when women think, they think with only half of their brain. Now, wives, that does not give you permission to call him a half-wit, okay? Because he will come back and he will say, well, it only takes half of my brain, it only takes half of my brain for you. I got that backwards. Let me mess it up here. The man uses both sides of his brain, okay? No, he uses one side. The woman, she uses all of her brain. Boy, okay, here we go. And I saw that. By the way, I saw that on TV after I read about it. They put these electrodes to this woman, and they asked her a question. She began to think, and her whole brain just lit up. And then they put the electrodes to a man and asked him a question, and just boom, just one side of his brain lit up. It was amazing. I mean, that was an amazing thing. And it's described like this, that women are like radars. And men are like laser beams. And that's a great description. You see, that helped me. That helped me to understand my wife. That helped me to understand my mama. You see, women are like radars. Beep, beep, beep. They got all this stuff going on. And they can just walk through a room and just pick stuff up. They can pick up all this stuff because their radar is going on. I've always wondered how in the world that Julia knew where my socks were. It's amazing. Honey, you know where my socks are? Yeah, they're over there. Why? Because she walks to their house and her radar is going off. Now, we men, we're laser beams. I mean, we get something focused and get something on our mind, and that's all we got on our mind, right? Let me show you how this works. Let's say shopping, okay? You see, women, when they go shop, I mean, it's an adventure. And usually they take somebody with them. And so they go together and they go into this store, and one will sit down and the other will go in and try on a dress or something. And they'll come out and they'll talk about it, and they'll just, it's just a big process. And the radar's going. And this woman might do that 2 or 3 times, and eventually it's a tag team. She'll tag that one sitting, and this one sitting will go do the same thing. Now, they can go from store to store to store all day long doing that and not buy one thing. Radars, okay? What do we men do? We men, we got our laser beam focus. It's like hunting. We know what we're going to get when we go in that store. We go in, we shoot it, we bag it, and we get out, right? Radar, laser beam. You really want to see it? Let me look at it. Let me show it to you on a trip, okay? She says, honey, she says, it's going to take us 6 hours to drive. And what do we men do? We laser beam. We say, I can drive it in 4 hours. And so for the next 400 miles, there's no bathroom stop. And I think, picture that for a moment. Over here, you got the laser beam, 4 hours, 4 hours. Over here, you got the radar, beep, 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 beep. And so here he is, 4 hours, 4 hours. She said, oh, honey, look at that beautiful sunrise. Isn't that amazing? 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours. Oh, honey, look, that looks like a flea market. I bet we could go in there and buy some things. 4 hours, 4 hours, 4 hours. Oh, honey, there's a place that looks like it has a clean restroom. Let's stop. 4 hours, 4 hours. Oh, honey, you just ran over somebody. 4 hours, 4 hours. Right? Laser beam, radar. No wonder we don't understand each other. That's why Rocky says here, look, dwell with her with understanding. Listen to this passage in Proverbs 24:3. Through wisdom, a house is built, watch it, and by understanding, it is established. A house is built, he says, with understanding. He says, when you love a woman, guys, he says, you will take the time, you'll spend the money, you'll do what you've got to do the best you can to understand that woman that's so much different than you. We say, well, that's pretty good, Rocky. My time's about to get out of here, so can you give me maybe another one or two? He says, I got one more. He says, you know, when a man loves a woman, he gives her protection. Notice as we read on in that verse, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel. Now, wives, don't misinterpret that. That doesn't mean that you're inferior, and that's not what Rocky's saying here. In fact, when you look at this and you study it in the Greek language, he really puts you on a pedestal. He pictures you as a fine piece of valuable china, but at the same time, very, very fragile. And gentlemen, he says, you know what? When a man loves a woman, he sees her as a fine piece of china that you handle and you protect. I don't know any way to say it, but just say it like this. Gentlemen, there is never, ever a reason or excuse that you have to lay a hand on your sweet wife. Never. And if it's gotten to the point in your relationship, you need some help yesterday. And you need to get it. You say, but, oh, Brother Hines, you don't understand. That's just the way we men in our family treat. That's the way my daddy did. Well, your daddy was wrong. And you need to break the chain. God did not make you stronger than her so that you could abuse her, so you could beat her, so you could control her and manipulate her with your strength. God made you stronger than her so that you could pull her into your side and bring her underneath your arm, and you could be to her what in many ways she cannot be for herself. Yeah, I look in the Bible and I look at scriptures that talk about a husband. And what I see, guys, what I see over and over is protect and provide. Protect and divide. It was a few years ago back out in San Antonio, Texas. They had the largest flood, the 5th largest flood, flash flood that ever had on that particular day. There was an elderly couple in their 80s from Philadelphia that was there in San Antonio. These flash floods started running down the streets, and they had taken the car of this elderly couple and pushed it into a ravine, and water was just pouring on them. The elderly man got out of the car. It was in the newspaper. It was a big thing. And he got out on the hood, and he was trying to get his sweet wife out of the car. Some people came along, and they saw the predicament, and they kept throwing him a rope. And he kept throwing it back, says, "I'm not coming without my wife." And they kept throwing, and he says, "I'm not coming." And he keeps trying, and the water just keeps building and building and building. And finally he said, "She's not going to make it. You've got to come, grab the rope." He says, "I'm not coming without my wife." And then a big gush of water came through and turned the car over, and both of them died. And when I read that, I thought, you know, here's a man who understood this principle of a husband who protects and provides. Well, Rocky, these folks are going to shoot me if I don't get out of here soon, so can you give us one more? He said, "I got one more." He says, you know, when a man loves a woman, I'm telling you, he has perception. He does his best to understand her. He is going to be there, and he's going to let her know that he's there for the long haul, and he's there for protection. But there's a third one. You see, when a man loves a woman, he will praise her. Notice the text one more time. He says, giving honor to the wife as the weaker vessel. He says, as heirs together with God. Gentlemen, you see that word honor there that he uses? Giving honor. That doesn't really mean that much to us. We know what it means. But in New Testament times, they knew what it meant. Why, when Peter wrote these words and they saw that Greek word, you see, that was the word for royalty. And what Peter was saying is, you treat her, you treat your wife, guys, when you really love her, you treat her like a queen. You treat her like the royalty that she is. And what is interesting, when you look at that Greek word there for honor, Peter will use it again. Watch how he uses it. It's in 1 Peter 1 in verse 19. And it's referring to the blood of Jesus. And it refers to it as the precious blood of Jesus. That word precious is the same Greek word that Peter uses here when he says, listen, you honor her. In other words, you see her and you treat her like the priceless gift that she is. Now we do that when we're dating, right guys? We do. But somewhere along the line, it ends. I mean, because we're goal-oriented, you know, there comes a time in our life when we say, I got to get a woman, 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 got to get a woman. And so we'll do anything we can to get a woman. We do crazy stuff. Well, we'll even open the door for her. We might even hold her hand. We might even go to opera with her. Why? Because we got to get a woman. But what happens is once all that courtship and all that dating is over and we get married, the courting stops. Why? Because we're goal-oriented. Our laser beam is focused. Now I got to support the woman, got to support the woman, got to support the woman. And all those things that we did to win her heart, we stopped doing. And treating her like the priceless gift that she is stops. Y'all have heard about the 5-year married cold, haven't you? It goes something like this. First year they get married, and she coughs. He says, oh, honey, you've got a cold. Listen, we're going down to the hospital. I'm going to make them put you in that hospital, and I know you don't like hospital food, and I'm going to cook it and bring it to you. Second year, she coughs. Oh, honey, you got a cough. We can't have this. Listen, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm taking you up there. I'm going to tuck you in. I'm going to have the doctor to come and see you. Third year, married cold. She coughs. Oh, honey, you're going to come down with a cold. Listen, you go out there and get in the car and you go down into the clinic and you say, I'll take care of the kids and you take care of yourself. 4th year, she calls. My goodness, woman, you're going to have to take care of yourself. Listen, when you get through cooking our supper and you get through bathing those kids and putting them in bed, you get up there and you get in bed. 5th year of a married couple, she calls. He says, woman, would you be quiet? Can't you see I'm trying to watch TV? If you're going to do that, go in another room, right? Rocky says, listen, when you really love a woman, you love her. And you treat her like a prize. And you do the things that you used to do. Very quickly, very, very quickly. Let me show you 3 ways, guys, that you got to do this, that's involved in doing this. First of all, you praise her and you honor her verbally. Verbally. She needs to hear that you love her. And she needs to hear, and to hear often, that you need her. You see, that's just the makeup of a woman. I know, guys, I know that sounds silly to you. That's ridiculous. I told her once I loved her. If I ever changed my mind, I know. But remember, she's a woman, and she's different, and she's got different needs. And affection, and conversation. And what she needs more than anything else is a steady diet of verbal praise. We'll give you some advice, fellas. It'd be well worth your time to spend some time in the book of Solomon. That guy knew how to caress a woman with words. I'm telling you, man. Whew. And that's what happens, you see, because it's just the way women are made. You can caress them with words. I mean, that guy. Now, I would say this. If you're going to go do that and take my advice and learn how to talk to a woman, you want to use the principles that he gives you. I wouldn't memorize a bunch of stuff in there and tell her. I wouldn't say, oh, honey, your hair's like a flock of goats. I wouldn't do that. Or I wouldn't say, oh, honey, your teeth are like a flock of shorn sheep, you know. But he knew the importance of saying it verbally, how much he loved her. And you need to do that in front of others, and you need to do it in front of your children. If you want your children to grow up and be that way, and you want your son to grow up and be that way, they need to see it in Dad. How do you honor her and treat her like a priceless gift? You do it verbally. I suggest, secondly, that you do it by the way you touch her. By the way you touch her. If I were to have a picture up here, sometimes I have slides, and if I had a picture up here of a couple holding hands, and I were to ask you, is this couple married or are they dating? What would be your conclusion? Most all of us would conclude they're dating, right? Because there's something about it, guys. When we get married, we've got to get a woman. We get the woman, we've got to get a job. We don't hold hands anymore. And I'm wondering, why should we let these young people and these people not married have all the fun? We just don't touch anymore. I don't know where they come up with this stuff, but guys, do you know that studies show that if you kiss your wife every morning before you leave, that those who do that, more than likely, they have less accidents going to work? I don't know where they come up with that stuff. Do you know that research has said if you kiss your wife every night before you go to bed, that those who do that live longer? I don't know how they come up with it, but they do. Guy had trouble with his wife. She wouldn't talk. She's having problems. He said, we got to go to a counselor. So they go to a counselor. And they work, and she just sits there, and she won't open up. And the counselor thinks, and after session, one day it hit the counselor while he's talking to her what she needed. And so he just gets up, and he goes over there, and he kisses her on the cheek. And she just starts talking. She starts talking to her husband, and she just starts talking about some of her issues and problems, and she came out. And when she got through talking, the counselor looked at the husband and says, now, sir, he says, that's what she needs every day of her life. And you know what he said? He said, Doc, I can only bring her in here on Mondays and Wednesdays. And that is funny. But that is so true to the way we men are. You know what the most common complaint of a woman is about her husband? He only touches me when he wants sex. That's it. You do it verbally. And you do it by the way you touch her. And finally, you do it by focused attention. Focused attention. We talked a few moments ago about how that we can live in the same house and yet not share a life together. We can be in the same room, be miles and miles and miles apart. We talked about how that we need, gentlemen, at many times to just take that remote and cut that TV off, get off that internet, lay the book or lay the magazine down, and here's the thing you do that's more important than anything. You look her in the eyes. So here's what we do. She comes in the room, we're watching the game, and she's talking, yeah, uh-huh, yeah. Well, I guess so. Whatever you think about, yeah, uh-huh. Oh, we're in front of the internet. Yeah, I get, well, what? Yeah. You see, when you cut the TV off, you take the internet and you get off of it, and you look her eyeball to eyeball, do you understand what that says? That says to her that right now, this is the most important thing in your life. And it says to her that you value her opinion. I tell you what you do, guys. Every now and then, what you need to do is take that game that you like, whether it's golf or bowling or whatever. Let's just say it's bowling on Thursday nights, okay? That's a big thing with you. Maybe fishing and tournaments. I don't know what it is. You know what you ought to do every now and then? When a man loves a woman, he'll do this. He'll just show up at the door. Maybe sometimes he's got flowers. She'll open it, and after she faints and gets up, she'll say, I thought this was your bowling night. I thought you were in the tournament tonight. And you say to her, yeah, but you know, of all the people in the world that I could be with, I want to be with you more than anybody else. And of all the things in the world that I could be doing, I want to be with you. Your wife needs that. Paul would say it like this in Ephesians 5:29. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. The greatest need that your wife has is to know that besides God, she is the most important person in your life. She wants to be cherished. There it is. What Peter says by inspiration, he says, this is what happens when a man loves a woman. May God help us as we leave here tonight to be better husbands. Be the kind of men that God would have us to be in our homes. Thank you for listening. I know I went over a little bit, but when you get my age, you just do that. And you don't care if somebody gets mad or not, you know. It's just the way it is. Come be with us tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to talk about what every parent should know for Bible class. Family matters. and then stand by your man. We're going to sing this song of invitation.